The Battle of Beaverdams, the story of Thorold's battle in the War of 1812 by Donald Keith Dewar and Paul Hutchinson. Here, at long last, is my account of the Battle of Beaverdams, which took place on June the 24th, 1813, and was another American defeat. Today the battle is largely remembered for the role of Canadian heroine Laura Secord, who traveled through enemy lines to warn the British of the impending American attack. This account of the battle will take the form of a review of the short book The Battle of Beaverdams, the story of Thorold's battle in the War of 1812 by area resident Donald Keith Dewar. I acquired a copy signed by the author somewhere in my travels, but I no longer have any idea of where or when. The 64-page booklet was produced by Slabtown Press in St. Catharines in 1996. But before we get to the book, what happened at Beaverdams? On June the 23rd, 1813, 600 U.S. troops under Lieutenant Colonel Charles B. Borsler were dispatched from the American base at Fort George to destroy a British supply base at Decue's house, a substantial two-story stone building located in what is present-day Thorold, Ontario. The Americans will camp overnight in the village of Queenston before proceeding to their objective on the 24th. Over the years, the name Decue, D-E-C-O-U, has been changed to Decew, D-E-C-E-W. Today you will find a Decueville, Ontario, on Highway 3 near Cayuga, where John Decue moved in 1834. And there is a Decue Falls near Brock University. Now, I went to Brock for 4 years, but never got to the falls. Don't ask me why. I guess I never got past the Brock pub. Carlene Black Label, anyone? En route, the Americans were ambushed by native warriors, surrounded, and terrified of being massacred, surrendered, which, as documented by Dewar, is only partially true. As well, most accounts focus on the roles of Laura Secord and James Fitzgibbons, not on the native warriors that did the actual fighting against the U.S. troops. Dewar dedicates his little book, quote, to the Aboriginals who fought so bravely at the Battle of Beaverdams, end of quote. Interestingly, while some of the warriors came from the Six Nations, many came from Lower Canada, modern-day Quebec. The warriors were commanded by Captain Francois Dominique Ducharme, a scout and fur trader from the Montreal District, with overall command under Major Peter V. de Heron of the 104th New Brunswick Regiment. And, I must admit, I was not familiar with either soldier. Dewar gives a detailed explanation of the roads in the Niagara of 1813, partly to explain what happened, but also to be able to relate what occurred to present-day landmarks. He does this as his primary intention in writing was to provide local residents with a guidebook to the scene of the battle, but also to explain why the American troops left their initial route, the St. David's Road at the base of the escarpment, and instead climbed the escarpment to take the mountain road at the top, where they were ambushed. Dewar says This diversion has been a contentious point among historians, but he explains it by saying that the Americans were blocked when they discovered an ambush awaiting them at a place called Turney's Crossroads on the St. David's Road. Turney's Crossroads on the St. David's Road. The ambush was a feint designed to fool the Americans into climbing the escarpment and taking the mountain road, and walking into a narrow gully where an ambush had been prepared for them by native warriors under the command of Captain Ducharme, and walk into it they did. From other accounts of the battle, I'd formed the impression that the Americans had been quickly surrounded by the native warriors, panicked, and surrendered. But Dewar's account indicates that it was quite a spirited firefight that lasted for 3 hours. Finding their advance blocked, the Americans attempted to retreat to Fort George, only to find this route blocked as well. The Americans were exhausted, low on ammunition, and their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Borsler, had been wounded twice in the thigh. Enter James Fitzgibbon, protege of Isaac Brock and leader of an independent company of men from the 49th Regiment. Fitzgibbon convinces the Americans that they are surrounded by a much larger force of British troops and that their only protection lies in surrender. And so Borsler agrees, having first torn up his written orders to prevent them from falling into British hands. Dewar speaks highly of Borsler, describing him as a, quote, skilled, dedicated, and ambitious soldier in the regular army, end of quote. He thinks much less of self-styled Major Cyrenius Chapin, who he characterizes as a braggart and a liar who could not be trusted. Chapin is one of those interesting characters that surfaced during the War of 1812. He had formed a company of 50 raiders who roamed the Niagara, where their principal object appears to have been theft and the kidnapping of Canadian farmers. It was Chapin and his men who spotted the supplies at DeQ's house and proposed the raid, but Borsler thinks so little of the Major and his plan that he demands his orders to capture the house in writing. Chapin professes to have intimate knowledge of the area leading to the objective, but when the American force is confronted by the potential ambush at Turney's Crossroads, he admits to Borsler his complete ignorance of the locale. Dewar also believes that Chapin and his men may have been the Americans who accidentally betrayed the attack plans to Canadian heroine Laura Secord. Whoever they were, these Americans stopped at the Secord house to demand a free meal and discussed the proposed raid at table. The Secords determined to get a warning message to militia officer William Hamilton Merritt, but as James Secord was recovering from wounds received at the Battle of Queenston Heights, Laura was elected to go. After a grueling walk over a large part of today's Niagara region, Laura eventually relayed her intelligence to Fitzgibbon, and so entered Canadian history. As noted earlier, Dewar's professed purpose in writing this short book was to provide a guide for local residents. Sadly, many battle locations have disappeared, the actual battle site being excavated during the construction of the third and fourth iterations of the Welland Canal. Still, if you live in southern Ontario and are able to get your hands on a copy, You'd have an interesting day tracking down the various places where the battle took place and what it looks like today. Dewar also wanted to credit the native warriors who fought the battle. In the end, the British never fired a shot, and so he lists the number of warriors from each tribe and names those killed. He also provides a muster roll for the local militia involved in the battle. My rating for this short book is 4 out of 5. Alas, it might be hard to get your hands on a copy, as I think the publisher may no longer be in business. If anyone knows, please share your information in the comments. The Butcher's Bill? Dewar says that around 30 Americans were killed, with between 60 and 70 wounded, some of whom were scalped and killed by native warriors. 23 American officers, 487 men, and 30 militia were taken prisoner. The native warriors, who did all the fighting, suffered 15 killed and 25 wounded. If this is your first visit to 1812 channel, my name is Warren, and I'm your host. I'm not a historian, nor am I an expert on the War of 1812. Instead, I'm a student wishing to learn about the conflict. Each month for the roughly 3 years of the war, I will outline the major events, and I will also try, the motive word is try, I will also try to review a book on the war. Please consider subscribing. Let's start a community of people interested in discussing the War of 1812. Did I miss anything? Any errors? Then let me know in the comments below. When the barrage lifts, cheers.